The last time a human being stood on the surface of the moon was December 14th, 1972. Eugene Cernan of Apollo 17 climbed back into the lunar module, looked back at the grey landscape, and left. He drove the lunar rover to the rim of a large crater and photographed it. He climbed the ladder. He did not make a speech. He just went. That was 52 years ago. In the decades since, human beings have not gone back. Not to the moon, not beyond low Earth orbit at all. The International Space Station orbits at roughly 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface. The moon is 384,000 kilometers away. The distance between where humans go regularly and where they have been at their furthest is roughly the difference between the height of a 6-story building and the circumference of the Earth. We have been, in other words, remarkably close to home. In the early 2020s, NASA began a program to change this. The program was called Artemis, named for the twin sister of Apollo in Greek mythology. Its vehicle for carrying astronauts beyond the Earth was called Orion. Its rocket was called the Space Launch System, or SLS. The goal was to return American astronauts to the moon, to land for the first time since 1972 on the lunar surface, and to do so this time with a crew that included the first woman and the first person of color to walk on another world.
The program is real.
The hardware is real. The spacecraft has already flown, and it is significantly behind schedule, significantly over budget, and facing technical problems that have caused engineers to lose sleep, managers to convene emergency meetings, and journalists to write the kind of articles that contain words like troubled and uncertain and delayed. This is the story of where Orion came from, what it is, what has gone wrong, who will fly it, and what it means that we are still, again, always, trying to go back. To understand why returning to the moon is so difficult, you have to understand why we stopped the first time. The Apollo program ended not because the technology failed. It ended because the political will had dissipated. Between 1969 and 1972, NASA landed men on the moon 6 times. The last 4 missions, Apollos 14 through 17, are, in some ways, the most scientifically impressive of the program. The astronauts traveled farther, stayed longer, drove rovers, collected more diverse samples. Apollo 17's crew included a professional geologist, Harrison Schmitt, the only scientist to walk on the moon.
By 1972,
the public had largely stopped watching. The television networks had stopped broadcasting the moonwalks live. The budget that the Apollo program had consumed, roughly $150 billion in today's money at its peak, was needed elsewhere. The Cold War urgency that had driven Kennedy's speech was gone. The Soviet Union had, functionally, conceded the moon race. The Americans had won. NASA proposed continued lunar missions. It proposed a lunar base. It proposed a mission to Mars. It proposed space stations and deep space vehicles. Most of these proposals were rejected. The ones that survived were scaled back. The Space Shuttle program, which followed Apollo, was designed to be economical, reusable, and commercially viable. It was none of these things. It flew successfully for 30 years, built the International Space Station, deployed the Hubble Space Telescope, and lost 2 crews in 2 disasters. It never flew to the moon. The gap between Apollo 17 and the first Artemis launch, 50 years, is not a gap of technical impossibility. The Apollo program demonstrated conclusively that going to the moon was possible. The gap is a gap of political priority, budget allocation, and the particular difficulty of maintaining a sustained national commitment to something expensive and dangerous over many decades.
Orion and Artemis
Are, among other things, an attempt to close that gap. The Orion spacecraft did not spring fully formed from a moment of inspiration. It has a long and somewhat complicated lineage that includes a cancelled program, a design revision, an international partnership, and more than 20 years of development. After the Columbia disaster in 2003, when the space shuttle disintegrated on re-entry, killing all 7 crew members, NASA began thinking seriously about what would replace the shuttle. The Bush administration commissioned a review that produced a plan called the Vision for Space Exploration, which proposed retiring the shuttle and developing new vehicles capable of returning to the Moon. The vehicles proposed were a crew capsule called the Crew Exploration Vehicle and a heavy-lift rocket called Ares 5. The Crew Exploration Vehicle was renamed Orion. The Constellation program, the umbrella name for Orion and its associated hardware, was developed through the late 2000s. In 2010, the Obama administration commissioned a review, the Augustine Commission, that concluded the program was underfunded and behind schedule. The administration proposed canceling Constellation and redirecting NASA toward commercial crew programs for low Earth orbit and eventual deep space missions. Congress largely rejected the cancellation. The result was a compromise that retained Orion and directed NASA to build a heavy-lift rocket, which became the Space Launch System, while also funding commercial programs. Orion, as it exists today, is a conical capsule roughly 5 meters in diameter, significantly larger than Apollo, capable of carrying 4 crew members. It is topped by a launch abort system, a tower with solid rocket motors that can pull the crew to safety in the event of a launch emergency. It is attached, during flight, to a European service module, built by Airbus for the European Space Agency, that provides propulsion, power, and consumables. The European partnership is one of the more underappreciated aspects of the Artemis program. The ESM is a direct descendant of the Automated Transfer Vehicle, the cargo spacecraft that Europe had developed to resupply the International Space Station. The partnership gives ESA a significant role in human deep space exploration in exchange for the service module that NASA needed. Building Orion has taken longer and cost more than originally planned. This is not unusual for large human spaceflight programs. What is somewhat unusual is the specific technical problem that emerged after the first flight.
On the 16th of November, 2022,
The Space Launch System lifted off from Kennedy Space Center's Launch Complex 39B for the first time. It was, by most measures, an impressive debut. SLS is the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built, more powerful than the Saturn V at the time of launch, though that comparison is somewhat technical and contested. It carried the Orion capsule, uncrewed, on a trajectory to the Moon, around the Moon, and back. The mission lasted 25 days. Orion flew more than 1.4 million miles, the furthest any spacecraft designed to carry humans has ever traveled. It entered a distant retrograde orbit around the Moon, a highly stable orbit roughly 70,000 kilometers beyond the lunar surface, and conducted tests of its systems. The splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on December 11, 2022, was smooth. The capsule was recovered. Engineers began examining it, and they found something they had not expected. The heat shield, the ablative surface designed to protect the crew from the roughly 5,000-degree temperatures of re-entry, had shed material in a way that the models had not predicted. In a process called skip re-entry, where the capsule dips into the atmosphere, skips back out, and then re-enters for the final descent, the outer layer of the AVCOAT ablative material had cracked and shed unevenly. Chunks had come off. In a crewed flight, this would not necessarily have been fatal. The temperatures inside the crew module had remained within design limits. But the behavior was unexpected. Unexpected behavior in a vehicle designed to carry human beings back from the moon at 25,000 miles per hour is not something you ignore. NASA grounded the crewed mission and began an investigation. The investigation into Orion's heat shield took more than 2 years. The problem, when it was eventually identified, was traced to the way the AVCOAT material behaved during the specific skip re-entry trajectory. Heat built up in the outer layer of the ablative material, causing gases to become trapped inside. The trapped gases created internal pressure. The pressure caused cracking. The cracking led to uneven shedding of the outer layer. The root cause had to do with the permeability of the material, how easily gases could escape through it rather than building up pressure inside. The specific trajectory of the Artemis 1 re-entry, combined with the material properties of the heat shield as manufactured, produced behavior that the pre-flight models had not captured. The fix for future missions, Artemis 3 and beyond, is to change the manufacturing process to achieve more uniform permeability. More consistent material means more predictable behavior. For Artemis 2, the first crewed mission, NASA made a different decision. The investigation concluded that the Artemis 2 heat shield, as manufactured, was safe for the crew, provided that the re-entry trajectory was modified. Instead of the skip re-entry used on Artemis 1, Artemis 2 would use a more direct trajectory that limited the time spent in the highest temperature portion of re-entry. This is a reasonable engineering decision. It is also a decision that carries risk. Not the same risk as doing nothing, but risk nonetheless. Deep space re-entry is not a situation where you want surprises. The heat shield on Artemis 1 surprised the engineers who designed it. The investigation produced an explanation and a mitigation. Whether the mitigation is sufficient will only be known when Artemis 2 flies. That is not a comfortable thing to say. It is the honest thing to say. The heat shield was not the only issue that delayed Artemis 2. NASA also identified a problem with the life support system. Inspections of hardware delivered for the spacecraft found failures in the circuitry that drives the valves controlling oxygen flow, circuitry that affects many parts of the life support system, including the systems that remove carbon dioxide from the cabin atmosphere. The valves had passed initial acceptance tests, but further inspection revealed a design flaw in the circuit. NASA decided to replace the electronics, not just in the Artemis 2 spacecraft, but in Artemis 1's successor, requiring additional testing once replaced. There was also a problem with the launch abort system, the mechanism designed to pull the crew away from the rocket in the event of an emergency during launch. The specific issue involved components that required further analysis before they could be cleared for flight. Taken together, the heat shield investigation, the life support electronics, the launch abort system, the delays accumulated. Artemis 2, originally targeted for late 2024, slipped to September 2025, then to April 2026. Then, in some analyses, possibly earlier, NASA indicated in early 2025 it was looking for ways to launch as soon as February 2026 if possible. In aggregate, Artemis 2 suffered 17 months' worth of delays in a 12-month period.
The program's critics
use these delays as evidence that NASA's approach, with its government-designed rocket and decades-old capsule architecture, was fundamentally flawed, too expensive, too slow, and should be replaced by commercial alternatives. The program's defenders argued that these were exactly the kinds of problems that unmanned test flights are designed to uncover, that finding them before sending people was the system working as intended, and that the delays, while frustrating, were the right response to genuine technical uncertainty. Both arguments contain truth. The Space Launch System is the most expensive rocket ever built to fly. Each SLS launch currently costs approximately $4 billion. For comparison, a SpaceX Falcon Heavy launch, a significantly less capable rocket but capable of similar near-moon missions with multiple launches, costs approximately $90 to $100 million. A SpaceX Starship, still in development but already demonstrating extraordinary capabilities, is projected to cost dramatically less per launch than SLS.
The cost difference is not a small number.
It is a factor of 40 or more. This disparity has fueled an ongoing debate about whether Artemis's architecture, SLS for Orion, Starship as the human landing system, is the right approach, or whether a more commercial-focused strategy would return humans to the moon faster and cheaper. The defenders of SLS have several arguments. The rocket is operational. It has flown successfully. It is human-rated. It has been through the safety certification processes required for crewed flight. It can carry Orion, astronauts, and cargo to the moon in a single launch, without the orbital refueling and rendezvous that alternative architectures require.
The critics point out
That SLS's cost is a direct consequence of a political decision to build the rocket using existing space shuttle infrastructure and contractors, a decision driven as much by congressional pressure to maintain jobs in key states as by optimal engineering. The same performance could have been achieved differently, at lower cost. In 2025 and into 2026, the broader question of Artemis's future came under additional scrutiny as the new Trump administration reviewed NASA's priorities. The administration had strong connections to Elon Musk's SpaceX. The question of whether the Artemis architecture would survive intact, whether SLS would continue to be funded, whether Orion would remain the crew vehicle of record, whether the program's goals and timeline would be maintained, was actively uncertain. NASA's website, as of early 2026, noted that it was updating its pages to align with the latest Artemis program updates announced in February and national space policy initiatives announced in March. That sentence, read carefully, contains a great deal of uncertainty. Whatever the politics and the budgets and the technical problems, 4 people are training to fly on Artemis 2. Their names are Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen.
Reed Wiseman
is the mission commander. He is a Navy test pilot and former NASA astronaut who spent 165 days on the International Space Station in 2014. He was selected as Artemis II commander in April 2023. He has said, in the months of delays, that he does not resent the caution. Sometimes in space, delays are agonizing, he acknowledged at the December 2024 press conference. But the investigation was necessary. He is not a man who would rather fly fast than fly safely, and his history suggests he means this. Victor Glover is the mission pilot. He is a Navy test pilot who flew on the first operational crew mission of the SpaceX Crew Dragon in 2020, spending 168 days on the ISS. On Artemis II, he will become the first person of color to travel to the vicinity of the moon. Christina Koch is a mission specialist. She holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman, 328 days on the ISS in 2019 and 2020. On Artemis 2, she will become the first woman to travel beyond low Earth orbit.
Jeremy Hansen
Is the fourth crew member representing the Canadian Space Agency. He will become the first non-American to travel to the vicinity of the Moon, a milestone made possible by a 2020 treaty between the United States and Canada that traded Canadian participation in Artemis for a seat on this mission. Hansen has not flown in space before. He will travel to the Moon on his first flight. Together, this crew will, on a single mission, accomplish more demographic firsts than any spaceflight since the first flight of any kind. But Artemis 2 is not primarily a diversity milestone. It is a test flight. The mission will fly a free return trajectory around the Moon, a path that would bring the crew home, even if Orion's propulsion system failed. They will not orbit the Moon, they will not land, they will fly around it, approximately 10,000 kilometers from the lunar surface, and return. The mission's purpose is to confirm that everything works with 4 humans aboard: the life support, the propulsion, the communications, the manual controls. It is the first step of several. It is not yet the landing. The first crewed lunar landing since 1972 was originally planned for Artemis 3 in late 2024. It is now planned, as of early 2026, for 2027 at the earliest. And even that date, many observers believe, is optimistic. The reasons are multiple. The lunar landing requires not just Orion, but a human landing system, a separate vehicle to ferry astronauts from lunar orbit down to the surface and back. NASA selected SpaceX's Starship for this role in 2021, in a contract award that was controversial and litigated by competing bidders. Starship, as of 2025, is an extraordinary achievement and an incomplete one. It is the largest rocket ever built, the most powerful ever flown. It has demonstrated the ability to return its booster to the launch site, catching it with mechanical arms, a feat that seemed impossible until it happened. But it has not yet demonstrated orbital refueling, the critical technology needed to give Starship HLS the propellant it needs to reach lunar orbit. And Starship HLS, the specific lunar landing variant, has not yet flown at all. The spacesuits for the lunar surface have also been a significant pacing item. NASA's original suit, the XEMU, fell years behind schedule. NASA shifted to a commercial approach, selecting Axiom Space and Collins Aerospace. Collins later withdrew. Axiom's suit, the AXEMU, developed in collaboration with Prada, which brought design expertise to the problem of making a functional pressure suit that allows natural movement, entered critical design review in 2024. In October 2025, NASA opened the moon landing contract to additional competitors due to delays in Starship's development, a sign that the agency was hedging its bets on whether SpaceX would be ready. In February 2026, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman confirmed a revised plan for Artemis 3. Rather than a lunar landing, the mission would test one or both commercial landers in low Earth orbit, similar to the role Apollo 9 played in testing the Apollo lunar module before the moon landing. The actual first lunar landing, the first since Cernan climbed that ladder in December 1972, was preliminarily assigned to Artemis 4, planned for 2028. The moon is still there. The timeline keeps moving. The urgency behind Artemis is not purely scientific. It is at least partly geopolitical. China is planning to send taikonauts to the moon by 2030. This is not a rumor or an optimistic projection from a Chinese press release. It is a stated goal backed by a credible program. China's lunar exploration program, the Chang'e series, has been remarkably successful. Chang'e 4 landed on the far side of the moon in 2019, the first ever far side landing. Chang'e 5 returned lunar samples to Earth in 2020. Chang'e 6 landed in the South Pole Aitken Basin on the lunar far side in 2024 and returned samples, the first samples ever retrieved from the far side. China has demonstrated that it can land on the moon, survive on its surface, and bring material back. The technology required for a crewed lunar landing is significantly more complex, but the foundation is real. The geopolitical dimension is not simply about national prestige, though prestige matters. It is about the specific resource that both programs are targeting, the lunar South Pole. The lunar South Pole contains permanently shadowed craters in which water ice is believed to exist in significant quantities. Water ice on the moon is not just a scientific curiosity, it is potential rocket propellant, hydrogen and oxygen separated by electrolysis, and it is the key resource that could make a sustained human presence on the moon economically viable. The question of who establishes a presence in the South Polar region first, and what norms and legal frameworks govern the use of its resources, is a live geopolitical question. The Artemis Accords, which 50 nations have signed, represent one answer. China has not signed them. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson was explicit about the competitive dimension when announcing Artemis 2's delay in December 2024. He spoke of getting Americans back on the moon before China. He was not being alarmist or jingoistic. He was describing, accurately, the situation as he understood it. Space exploration, as it was in 1957, is not purely a scientific enterprise. It never has been. It is worth being precise about what the Orion spacecraft is and what it is not. Orion is the crew transportation vehicle for deep space. It carries 4 people from Earth to lunar orbit and back. It is not the landing vehicle. Starship HLS will do that. It is not a habitat. The crew will not live in Orion for extended periods on the moon's surface. It is the capsule at the top of the mission architecture, the piece that goes last and carries the crew through the most dangerous moments of any mission: launch and re-entry.
It is in some ways
A philosophical descendant of the Apollo command module, a conical capsule, a heat shield, a parachute, landing in the ocean. In other ways, it is radically more capable. It is larger. It carries more electrical power from 4 solar array wings that extend like the wings of a dragonfly. It has more advanced life support. It has more computing power. Its abort system is more capable. What it shares with Apollo, and with every human spacecraft before it, is the fundamental challenge of keeping human beings alive in an environment that is not merely hostile, but lethally so. Vacuum, radiation, temperature extremes, the violence of launch and re-entry, and returning them safely to a planet that they never really left, in any biological sense. The human body is extraordinarily well adapted to one specific environment. Every spacecraft is an attempt to create a portable version of that environment and carry it, briefly, somewhere else. Orion does this for 14 to 21 days, the duration of the lunar missions it is designed to support. Beyond that, crews would need additional habitat: a lunar gateway station in orbit, surface habitats, infrastructure that does not yet exist. The moon is 3 days away. In human spaceflight terms, it is close. In terms of what it takes to go there safely and return, it is the edge of what current human engineering can reliably achieve.
There is a photograph taken by the Orion spacecraft
During Artemis 1, it shows the Earth and the Moon in the same frame, both of them. The Earth is a blue and white crescent, vivid and detailed. The Moon is a grey sphere, close, its cratered surface clearly visible. Between them is the black of deep space. No human had taken this photograph. The capsule was uncrewed. But the camera saw what a person would have seen, from approximately 70,000 kilometers beyond the far side of the Moon, the distance at which Orion flew in its distant retrograde orbit. 4 people will see this view, or something like it, when Artemis 2 flies. They will be the first human beings to travel beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo 17, the first in more than 50 years. The first woman, the first person of color, the first Canadian, the first of what NASA hopes will be a steady stream of people going beyond this planet for the rest of the century. The program is behind schedule. The costs are high. The technical problems have been real and demanding. The political uncertainty about the program's future is genuine. None of this is unusual for human spaceflight. The Apollo program was behind schedule. It was over budget. It killed 3 people in a fire on a launch pad and came within 13 seconds of losing 2 more on the lunar surface. It operated under enormous political pressure and the constant awareness that the Soviet Union was trying to reach the same destination. And it worked. Whether Artemis will work, whether it will land people on the Moon in 2028 as currently planned, or whether it will slip further, or whether the architecture will be restructured, or whether the geopolitical urgency will maintain the political will required to see it through. None of that is certain. What is certain is this: there is a spacecraft, right now, being prepared for a flight around the Moon. There are 4 people training for that flight every day in simulators and in the water and in the capsule itself. There is a heat shield attached to a capsule that has flown past the Moon and come back. There is an engine that has been tested and a life support system that has been fixed and a launch abort system that has been cleared. The gap between 1972 and today is 52 years. The gap between today and the next time a human being stands on the Moon might be 2 years, or 5, or 10. But the direction is clear. We are slowly going back.